targeting some of the world's most ruthless drug cartels on Canadian soil. I'm Mercedes Stephenson. The West Block starts now.
We're going after the money.
Echoing Donald Trump, Ottawa announced several transnational cartels will be designated terror organizations. But what will that mean to Canadians? The Prime Minister's former national security and intelligence advisor joins us in less than a minute. And Canada-US relations are the choppiest they've been in decades. How is our ambassador in Washington navigating the waters? We speak with Kirsten Hillman coming up. They're some of the most ruthless, best-armed cartels in the world, and the federal government says it's going after them.
The Government of Canada is listing 7 transnational criminal organizations as terrorist entities under Canada's criminal code.
I can confirm that we do have intelligence that different cartels operate in Canada. There's also strong intelligence that Canadians have actually moved to Mexico and South America to facilitate the transport of certain commodities into Canada.
The cartels include Mexico's oldest criminal group, the Sinaloa Cartel. Known for their leader, El Chapo, the massive drug empire reportedly rakes in $3 billion a year. Also on the list, the rising cartel called Jalisco New Generation. It's tied to one drug bust last month in Toronto worth more than $80 million. Cartels like these are known for extreme violence, supreme loyalty, and seemingly unlimited funding of military weapons and armored vehicles like these. So what dent could Ottawa actually make? Joining us now is former National Security and Intelligence Advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Jody Thomas. Welcome to the show, Jody. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Canadians don't think a lot about cartels in the way that perhaps Americans do. I've been down around El Paso, seeing the incredible influence there, the tremendous violence on the other side of the border. But Canada is affected by cartels, and they do operate here and have increasingly been operating drug and criminal syndicates in this country. You're the former National Security and Intelligence Advisor. What was your perspective on these cartels now being designated terrorist groups in Canada? Do you think that that will be helpful in fighting them?
Oh, I think will be enormously helpful. It's going to open a number of tools for the RCMP to collaborate with their partners in the United States and Mexico, but also it unlocks a number of tools they can use here domestically, particularly the financial tools, which has been mentioned. FinTrack was created to track terrorist financing, to work with banks, and the RCMP will be able to use that information and the power and the capability of FinTrack in order to assist in their investigations. And I think it's an enormously important step for them, and I think it will reap huge benefit.
How would you describe the threat that these cartels pose to Canadians and Canadian national security?
It's organized crime, right? And so organized crime, no matter what shape it takes, is a threat to us, and we're seeing an increase in it. We're also seeing an increase in gun violence. We're seeing an increase in gang violence, and it's being fueled by drug money. And so we are being affected in a way we've not previously seen. The problems are moving north. The gun problem is moving north. The fentanyl problem exists here. And I would say that 10, 15, 20 years ago, we would not have used the word cartel with regard to activity in Canada, but it's very prevalent now. It's becoming a problem, and we have an opportunity here to get a grip on it before it becomes a national crisis.
What has your reaction been to the change in tone of the Trump administration? You were around for Trump 1.0. You were at National Defense at that point, I believe, as the deputy minister, but you were in the government for a long time in these sort of intelligence and security roles. And the tone has changed radically towards Canada in particular. It's not just about trade. It's about all these other questions. I'm curious to hear your take on that, and also what you're hearing from your former colleagues in the intelligence and security and military community.
So I think that the most noticeable difference, of course, is that the individuals who surrounded him the first time and were able to give him advice because they had deep experience in the security and defense world, they're no longer around. And so he is operating without challenge and without anybody saying, no, that's not a good idea. He has surrounded himself with people who are just saying yes. Last week, I was in Ottawa and hosted a roundtable of former defense senior officials and senior officers to talk about what we could do going forward in terms of the 2%, because that is unchanged from President Trump. What we are hearing is that the relationships on the military side and in security and intelligence community, the individual relationships remain very strong. And I think that's enormously important. It was important in the first presidency. We will continue to work with the agencies and the Pentagon in the way we always have. I think that as long as those lines of communication remain open, there is opportunity to understand what's going on and perhaps mitigate any action being taken.
How important is it for Canada to speed up getting to that 2% marker on defense spending?
So I think it's enormously important for a couple of reasons. One, it's going to give confidence both to the United States, but our other NATO allies that we're very serious about this. We made a commitment. We have to live up to the commitment, but we also need to have a capable armed forces. And so the mix of capability that is required, how we're going to procure it, we need to accelerate all of that. And it is, I think, doable. The time is now. There is, an opportunity to look at how we've done things forever and perhaps make some significant change. Confidence is the key word in all of this. We need our allies to be confident that Canada is a reliable partner. We always have been. We will be going forward.
When you look at what's happening in terms of reliable partners, the rules have changed dramatically. You're hearing the American president falsely assert Ukraine started the invasion of itself and not Russia. You have him speaking to Vladimir Putin, upending 60 plus years of a U.S. stance of what NATO existed for and so much of the international system. How does a president and his close advisors who are close to Vladimir Putin change our calculus for national security and change what we can expect and assume about protection in the global order?
He's never believed in multilateralism. He's got this concept of deals, and that is not a way to approach national security. He's talking about the 51st state, but the threats to Europe are perhaps greater than the bombast about Canada. And so the meetings that are going to be going on over the next couple of weeks with foreign ministers and defense ministers to look at what is happening in Ukraine and the Russian-United States approach, I think are going to be critical. We have always said with regard to Ukraine, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, and that has to stand. There is no other choice.
What happens to Canadian national security and operations abroad without that American guarantee? Because so much of our continental security has been backed up by America as a partner, our ability to operate internationally. We've used American resources, American bases, American intelligence. With all of that in question now, what does it mean for our ability to secure our own safety as a country and to operate independently?
I think what is important in all of this, and whether we're talking about economic security, environmental security, national security, or defense, is building Canadian resilience. And so I think it's why the trade conversation about internal trade barriers is so important, because none of this happens in isolation. Our national security is also dependent on our economic security. I think that NORAD will persist. We are important to the Americans, particularly in the Arctic. We are the eyes in the Arctic, and our investment in NORAD and speeding up the investment in NORAD modernization is really critical. I think there's more money that can be spent on NORAD. And I think as we look at our 2% and how we're going to spend it, we need to focus on Canada and our ability to defend Canada. And continental security is important to our NATO allies. Arctic security is important to our NATO allies. And this is where we need to focus our efforts.
What you mentioned there about the Arctic, obviously there's a lot of concern the Americans could just take over and do it themselves or divvy it up with Russia with how close Trump is getting to Putin. When you hear this conversation about the 51st state in that context, do you believe there's a legitimate security threat to Canada from the United States?
I don't believe there's a physical security threat. I think there's an economic security threat. I don't believe that the United States can just do what needs to be done in the Arctic on their own or with Russia. And certainly they're foolish if they think Russia is a reliable partner in any of that. And I would imagine that the experts within the security and defense infrastructure in the United States would be pushing back pretty hard on any concept of partnership with Russia. We have an enormous Arctic archipelago. It is important that we're able to defend it. It is important that we're able to work with the United States and NATO in the Arctic. I just don't envision a world, although I could be proven wrong, I don't envision a world where the United States is partnering with Russia in the Arctic. Their desire for the same hydrocarbons, critical minerals, etc., is too strong. It's too nationalistic. What we need to do is ensure that we are an indispensable partner, but at the same time, be responsible for our own sovereignty and our own defense in the Arctic.
Jody Thomas, thank you so much for joining us with your insights this morning.
Thank you.